investing, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I was doing was making sure that whatever I invested in was going to have some sort of passive income aspect or component to it. And I also asked myself that the funnest times I ever had was during when we were in the second home resort space. And so this was back in 2011, 12, 13. I'm kind of figuring this stuff out. And lo and behold, during this time when I lost everything, I actually had a property I bought up in Bear Lake, Utah, a little mountain town in Utah. And I own this property. I bought this in 2006. And at the time, Airbnb wasn't even a thing. And we would rent it on the weekends on a local classified called KSL and Craigslist. And it would rent on the weekends. Well, when I lost everything, there was one asset that I didn't lose, and it was this cabin. And it was because we were able to rent it while we weren't using it. And we were renting it on the weekends as a short-term rental. And so this was in the back of my mind the whole time thinking, hey, I had this asset that the worst time of my life financially still performed, and during a really bad time for real estate. This was from 2008 to 2010 that this property was performing really well when everything else was just sliding, right? It lost value like everything else, but I made money. And so back in 2015, I decided that this was when we really kind of planted our flag in the sand and said, we're gonna stick with short-term rentals, and we're gonna go down this road, and we're gonna learn everything we can about them. And ultimately wrote that book that you were holding up. I actually wrote that in 2017. And then we started off a company called Lifestyle Asset University. I thought it'd help 100 people that get into the short-term rental investing game. We're now just over 3,000 people we've got the largest coaching company in the US for helping investors get into short-term rentals. So it's been a wild ride and a lot of fun.
Yeah,
So
and
that was as short as I could try to make that for you, Brigham.
I really appreciate that. And guys, if you really want to hear more of that, he's got a great YouTube video that is online.
Yeah.
Diving in like I'd say like a half an hour of just
Right.
really understanding your origin story. And I love to get to know a little bit more about what are the hiccups at the very beginning. What are those internal struggles that you had as maybe a realtor, the fix and flipper, to say, hey, now this is how I'm getting into the short-term rental game. Because I remember in one of the podcast episodes you brought up in the past, you said you had an experience where this old real estate investor said, hey, you're not a real estate investor because you don't have any recurring cash. Can you talk to us a little about that story?
Yeah. So back in the day when I was in my 20s, I felt like I was kind of making my mark in Ogden, Utah. I thought I was this hotshot real estate investor, and I would go to the real estate investing club meetings, right? And I would go there with my chest pumped out, thinking I was a big shot because of how many houses we were fixing and flipping. At the time, we were flipping about 100 homes a year, right? And so at the peak, we were doing about 150 homes a year, but I thought I was a big deal, right? And I showed up, and this old boy named George put his arm around me. He said, Shawn, you got to calm it down, my friend. He said, you got to dial it back a notch or two and quit referring to yourself as a real estate investor. And I thought to him, I'm like, George, what are you talking about? Right. And so he said, you're not an investor. You have a job fixing up and selling houses. You're fixing and flipping houses. That's a job. That's not an investment. Right. And he said, unless you have something that is recurring that makes you money while you sleep, you're not an investor. And I remember, and you've heard me tell the story, Brigham, but I remember I was mad. Like it really shot my ego down. I was like, I was still this cocky 25-year-old and thinking I knew more than I did for sure. And it was, I went home and told Teresa, and she said, and we kind of talked about it, and we at least were smart enough to say, well, maybe he has a point, right? And we got into long-term rentals. We did buy a lot. We bought 52 long-term rentals in 2 years. And so we started buying single family long-term rentals, not even really getting into the multifamily space. I had 1 or 2 fourplexes mixed in there and a couple duplexes, but the majority of them were just all single family homes. And it was my first introduction into trying to figure out the passive income side of life. I just didn't, it's this learning curve, right? You just don't know what you don't know. And at the time, I was young enough and dumb enough to just go do things rather than try to seek out mentors and help and advice. And really until I lost everything, I always loved books, right? I went to bookstores. I went to a couple seminars here and there, but I really didn't just latch on to like finding somebody that was better than me until I lost everything, and starting to get those coaches and those mentors to try to learn from them. And it's funny how you go through life and you figure, we all go through the hero's journey, right? Every single person goes through a hero's journey, which is ultimately, we're up against a decision. We have to make a decision. We start running down a road. Things are going okay. And then the dragon jumps out, and then it's, everything's lost. We can't figure out a way to go. We have to overcome these obstacles before we can get to the princess. And that's just life, right? That's how life goes. And unless we're willing to run down that road, it's really difficult to progress and grow and proceed down toward our goals, right? And when you're young, a lot of times, at least for me, when I was young, I just didn't think, I think you can skip all that, right? You can skip to, okay, I just want to meet the princess, right? And it just doesn't work that way. You have to go through these bumps and bruises along the way. But because without it, you're not strong enough to defeat the dragons and get the princess, right?
There has to be that progress. There's
Yeah.
opposition in all things is one of the ways I
Yeah,
think about.
absolutely.
As we go through those turmoils, it changes us, right?
Yeah.
Maybe when we met that dragon, if we would have met at the very first chapter of our story, it would have slayed us.
He would have killed us. Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to get past him. You're exactly right. And that's life, right? And the older I get, the more that I really enjoy that part of it. I enjoy, like, we would never tell somebody's success story that won on the very first tryout, right? Somebody that just, hit the jackpot on the first try. We never tell those stories. We tell the stories of the people that have the struggles and the obstacles that they have to overcome, and they have to pick themselves up off the ground. And ultimately we all become that story, right? We all have that story ourselves. And sometimes we're right in the middle of the dragon fight, and we don't know what we're going to do. And we have to realize, okay, we're going to figure this out. That's the beautiful part about being a human being, is how resilient we are and how resourceful we are.
Absolutely. And when you don't have the resources, you got to be resourceful.
Absolutely.
You've got some great points there. Now, one of the things that I also really appreciate about you is you focus on not just building a business that you can really trust, and that you're doing things honestly, ethically, morally, but you actually want to have a lifestyle
Yeah.
that is built into it as well. Because there's lots of ways you can do real estate, and it consumes all of your time, all of your energy, all of your effort. Can you talk to us about how you coined this phrase lifestyle assets? Because I think it's
Yeah.
very unique to you. So go ahead and talk to us about it.
Yeah, one is, I do believe that they have to add to your, like, we're trying to build, like, we always talk about financial freedom and making money and doing everything, right? Very little do we talk about lifestyle and financial freedom together, because there's the other side of the coin where we just talk about lifestyle freedom. It's like, okay, I just want the 4-hour work week, and I want just things to be, sipping pina coladas, laptop lifestyle. I'm not into that either, right? I want to do something that adds to my lifestyle, builds financial freedom, but I don't mind putting in, 60, 70, 8-hour weeks, because we enjoy it, right? And so the lifestyle asset part of it for me was this: whatever I was investing in with vacation homes, we have a personal use aspect of them, right? I can buy and build this portfolio of assets that we can actually use, but a lot of times we're working hard at it. We're working the whole time, but we enjoy it because we're there with our family. I've never been a part of an asset class that families do together. And since I've had kids, and I realize how important, spending that time, time is so fleeting, right? We just don't have enough of it. And so if we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and work, it doesn't mean it's always fun. And it's always, like I said, sipping pina coladas on the beach. It means that, why don't we make the work, meaningful, and something that we can do together, right? Because it can be meaningful if we're all going through it together. And the lifestyle aspect, ultimately I said, it's got to pay for itself. Somebody else has to manage it, so it doesn't become a second job. And third, I got to be able to use it. I want that personal use aspect. So on a very simple level, that's what a lifestyle asset is. But at a deeper level for me, and this is probably one of the only times I've ever actually explained this, Brigham, but for me, a lifestyle asset is, I wanted something that me and Teresa and Wyatt and Grace got interested in together. We built together, right? Because I've been financially free for a decade now. I am not retired by any stretch. Like, I'm at the office all day, every day, and we're doing a lot. We work hard, and we work hard every day. But a lot of that work is together with the family, right? We look and analyze properties together, and we do things together, and they get as interested in it as I am. To me, that's a true lifestyle asset that we can do because of the time we're able to spend together doing something, moving that ball forward.
I think that that right there, when you are willing to have your family come along with you and they've bought
Mhm.
into your vision, they're enrolled into what you're
Mhm.
doing, that makes a huge difference because it's not
Huge.
just your dream, it's our dream.
It's our dream. Yeah, exactly.
Now,
And it's a lot of fun. And we all have different roles in that dream, right? And that's what's fun. And I've been, like I said, I've been investing in real estate for 23 years. I've done a lot and been in and out of a lot of different asset classes. And I've never ever seen an asset class. And you're part of our mastermind group at Vodyssey. How many, I mean, it's families, right? It's husbands and wives and kids and grandparents, and everybody's doing it together. And to me, that is, I mean, that's the real mark of what I call a lifestyle asset.
yeah, one of the things I think is really unique about uh, one of the elements of your education that you bring up is it's not just about, is this going to make me money? It's, am I going to enjoy it? Am I going to have that personal use aspect? Am I going to have my family come along with me and make memories? There's one
Yeah.
of these things that has stuck with me. I think I heard it honestly like 2 years ago on one of your podcasts. Talk about this idea of the 18 summers.
Yep.
We have such a finite amount of time with our children. This is something that pops into my head because like I've got 4 kids. I barely had a baby boy. Really
Uh-huh.
excited about that. But we get 18 summers with them as children, and then they grow up, and we never know how much more time we're going to have. So, can you
Yeah.
talk to us about how you have made your summers meaningful with these
Right.
aspects?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and when we both live in Utah, and so our neighboring state to the north, Idaho, ran that ad campaign a few years back. I don't know if you remember seeing that. It was probably about maybe 10 years ago now. They ran a campaign called 18 Summers, and that's really when I really learned of that concept. Now there's actually a company called 18 Summers.
Oh, no.
Somebody that runs that with the concept of figuring out how to spend the most amount of time with your kids, and for us, you're right. It's like, man, we have 18 summers with our kids. And now ultimately we want to have these amazing 18 summers and then parlay those 18 summers beyond that, right? But the concept is let's not take for granted the time we have and those summers that we do have and the memories that we can make. Teresa and I have always been, we've always just, and right or wrong or indifferent, or you can agree or don't agree with this. We don't do presents. We don't do gifts for birthdays, for Christmases, for anything else. But we always, together as a family, we have a trip that we're going to go on, something fun that we're going to go do, because we always look back and think, okay, I can't remember almost any gift I've ever gotten, but I can remember the times that I go on trips with my family and spend time with them and things like that. So we wanted the kids to grow up in an environment that they had that's what they had, right? The memory bank of these different areas and times that we go. Now it's really fun because they turned 13 this year, and it's just a fun, like, it's just become such a tradition that we're always doing at least 2 or 3 fairly big trips. Like last year we went to London. We'll probably go somewhere over to Europe again this year, but we also go to our properties on a regular basis, and we figure out, like, and it's really kind of fun. Like my son, we have a property in Georgia. That's his favorite place. He tells everybody he's from Georgia now instead of Utah, because he thinks because he just like thinks like this is my spot, right? This is what I love. Grace is the opposite. She likes the big city stuff, and so together we get to experience. And what we typically do is allow each member of the family to pick and kind of plan and choose one. And so, like, I would never pick to go to London. I would never pick to go to New York Broadway. My daughter and my wife are going to pick that, but I get to go experience that, right? But they're not going to pick to go to, a fly fishing ranch or somewhere up in Montana and just be disconnected. And so we get to experience it, and we all have a great time doing all of it, right? And so everybody gets to choose kind of their own little thing and bring the family along, and we have so much fun, really probably doing the other people's stuff than our stuff that we choose. And it's kind of grown into that at this stage, and it's really fun.
I think being willing to let your kids choose and your wife choose and get that full rounded life,
Right.
that's so cool. I
Yeah.
love how you're focusing on experience over like gifts.
Yeah.
And this is something that I actually think is also unique in your education. You talk about this dream experience that you create for your customer.
Yeah.
And the importance of not just having a great property, because almost anybody can come up with a great property, but there's a story element to make sure that they come through and they're welcomed and they feel the details matter. So can
Yeah.
you talk to us about how you have created that dream experience for your guests?
Yeah. And so one is understanding really the game that we're playing, right? First and foremost, like people assume because we're in the real estate game and we do short-term rentals and invest and we offer properties up for short-term rent that we're selling properties, and we're not. First, we have to buy into the concept that we're selling an experience. People are buying an experience from us, right? They're renting that experience from us, not renting a property from us. And so when I started to buy in and realize how powerful that was in our space, and then how important that was for us as a family, right? It was pretty easy for us to kind of roll over to that, is to say, okay, how can I have this target audience, pick a target audience, and create this amazing experience for them, figure out how to articulate it in all of my listing stuff, and then be able to market it that way to where they raise their hand and say, I want to stay there over above and beyond everybody else's property. That was a really fun game for me that I got really excited about. Still every single day get excited about it because it's so fun at the end of the day, because if you nail it, people have, and they send you some of the most amazing reviews. They send you some of the most amazing messages saying, man, this was exactly what we needed. 2 weeks ago, I got a message from one of our guests and said, hey, it was an older couple that stayed in our Georgia property. And he said, my wife got diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer, and we just needed this getaway. And we went and stayed at your property, and the experience that we had and the memories that we made are just something that will be never forgotten. And we really appreciate all the things that you put together. And so when you get those messages, and that's kind of an extreme example, but it just is like, man, that's why you do it, right? You want to do it to where somebody is like, this made a difference for me. And it was so fun. Some of our properties, we have like our property up by Yellowstone National Park, we had set up as for fly fishermen, right? And it was, we like dialed it into like, I knew those rivers like the back of my hand. I love to fly fish. I know why they're coming in. I would have a handwritten note for them telling them, hey, here's my favorite rivers, my favorite spots. Here's the map. I've highlighted it for you. I literally had like highlighter, and I would mark up all these maps, and I would point to a corner. I'd say, there's a log right here. There's always fish right behind this log. Around this next corner, there's these 3 boulders. You want to go behind the second of the third boulder. Like I would get really detailed on the map of what they were doing. They'd have a box of my flies my favorite flies. We had waiter drying stations. We had everything that they would need for that great experience. And ultimately, this property was a waitlist only property after about a year and a half. And you couldn't even get in. It was booked a year out in advance because it was all repeat guests. They would come back and they would pay way more than my next door neighbor's property. And because we knew how to sell and set up the experience versus just the property. And so, ultimately it's a good business decision to do that, but it's really fun on the back end when you start getting the messages, like I mentioned before, and somebody telling you and sharing in their anniversaries and their weddings and their birthdays and the needing to disconnect from life because they just got some horrible news and trying to figure out how they're going to attack it. Right. And they're like, this was the perfect spot for me because you took the time to really make it the perfect spot. The property they stayed in, the experience there is to come in, disconnect. We don't have good internet. If you're here to work, go somewhere else. You're going to sit here by the lake, grab your favorite drink, and you're going to just chill out and relax, unwind, and disconnect. And that's what they needed, right? And that's the experience they got. And that's what we delivered. And it was really, really fun. And when you start to get those messages back, to be a part of that, it's just, I just think it's fun to be a part of that.
I think that's adding that human element into why
Yeah.
you're doing what you're doing, because you're always constantly thinking, what is my guest's experience, not what's this property going to be doing. And we're not selling real estate, we're selling that experience. I think that was a great distinction.
Yeah.
Great distinction. Now, another thing that I thought would be really helpful to talk about, just as an overview. I know you're 2 Comma Club award winner. You always have that in the back
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. I should have. I got.
But I'm curious, just as a business owner, how did you structure your business in such a way that you were able to have the solid foundation and scale it to where you are now?
It's a great question. So when I started this, Brigham, I didn't have the intention to grow it to where it grew to. And so when I started it, and I think that this actually is the reason we were able to grow it and why I start here. Normally we hear start with the end in mind, and I'm a huge believer of that. So don't think that I'm not. I wanted to help 100 people make a lot of money and understand how we make a lot of money in short-term rentals, right? I had already built a portfolio. I had already done that. I knew how to do it. I had also had some experience helping other investors do it because of when I lost everything, that's how I made my money back, was as an agent with other investors, helping them build their portfolios, right? So I had some experience in that. My goal was to say, okay, together I'm going to document this process that we started to realize was fairly repeatable. And it was a game that was growing significantly. Short-term rentals were starting to come into favor, right? This was pre-COVID still. This was way before COVID. We're talking 15, 16, 17, 18, the late teens, but they were still growing pretty fast.
Mhm.
And I mean, COVID just skyrocketed them. But at the time, I wanted to have a process and a product and an offer that an investor could plug into and pretty predictably succeed in the game, right? And so I said, oh, if I could do that, 100 people will, and we can help 100 people create lifestyle financial freedom. I'm game for that, right? Let's go down and run down that road. Ultimately, because we got such great results, it started scaling really fast, right? It started saying, hey, listen, 100 quickly turned into 500, 500 to 1,000. And we kept raising our prices and doing this. And in the beginning, I didn't have a mentor teaching me how to do this. When I started realizing, holy crap, there's a market and a need for this. There's a lot of people reaching out to us on, how do we do this? What are we doing? A lot of it was referrals in the very beginning. I hired some coaches, and you mentioned the 2 Comma Club. Russell Brunson was one of the first coaches I hired. I think he's brilliant. I think he's super smart. Love or hate Russell. I don't, I love him. And I think that he's really smart. And ultimately, we hired him as a coach, hired a couple other coaches and mentors that knew the online, coaching space, knew how to put together offers, knew how to do all those different things, right? We still don't have a big stack. We have one product, and we've always had one product. I don't have a small one. I don't have the lead magnets and all that stuff beyond. I have a book, but you can just get the book for free. But I have one product. And ultimately, within 2 years, we got the 2 Comma Club X award, which is making over 10 million in funnel. And so it just continued to grow. And I believe that it grew, Brigham, because we focused on fulfillment first versus trying to just sell courses, right? And we really focused on making sure we had the best fulfillment that we could put together. And we changed, I changed the course 3 times in the first 2 years, right? And just how we delivered it and what we did and the coaches we brought on and the different things that we knew that people had hiccups with. And so we would focus on that because it was really important for me to not just make the money with the course, but I wanted people to get results. Right. And you're part of that community, and you can see that, I mean, we have a lot of people making a lot of money on their properties, and we've been blessed to be a part of that journey with so many people. Now we're almost at 3,000 people. We'll hit 3,000 people this month over the past 4 years that have joined our high-end coaching group.
And I really appreciate the time, energy, and effort that you put in to simplify, because I think there are a lot of coaches in this space that know how to do it for themselves, but they don't know how to articulate it simply so that somebody else can implement it. And it feels like you're all about implementation. If it doesn't get the result, then you're like, let's rethink this.
Right. 100%.
Yeah. Like there was one time where you're going into AirDNA, you're talking about it, and there's an update. And instead of just letting AirDNA teach how to, do their update, you're like, we're going to re-record this part of the class. We're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that about your energy and attention to fulfillment, like you said. Right. So if I can ask you this question, when you have someone that is hesitant, because I mean, you don't necessarily do all the sales yourself anymore, but when you have someone that's hesitant, you're like, man, I just don't know. Is this going to work for me? How do you help them get over that? Will this work for me? Will this system work in general? How do you help them get over those self-limiting beliefs?
Yeah. One, we have to dial it back and make sure that it really can, right? Sometimes somebody's hesitancy can be realistic, right? Because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's these limiting beliefs. But I always start always start with their outcome. What are they trying to do? Like, what is the end goal? Most people just don't think about that. What are their property goals? And what is the outcome we're chasing? And does this asset class give them a better chance to reach that outcome than, other asset classes, for example? Maybe, short-term rentals have pros and cons like everything else. And, they might be better off doing something else. So luckily for me, I've been involved in a lot of asset classes. So I actually can have a conversation and tell somebody, listen, this might not be the right path for you. So I always start there with the lens of maybe this isn't right. Let's figure out why you feel like that. First of all, what are we trying to do? Or where are we at? First of all, what are we trying to do? And then how are we going to get there? Does short-term rentals give us a better chance of reaching that outcome? Then it comes down to, Brigham, of we all will give ourselves reasons not to move forward. Now, when the people that we work with, for example, and now I always tell people it's way easier to move forward when your back's against the wall. It's way easier to move forward and do something when you've lost everything. And I can say that with 100% certainty because I've been both places. I've been to places where I've got a lot of money and I've been places where I had nothing. And when you have nothing, it's, you have nowhere to go but forward, right? Now, the hardest part is when you have a lot or you built a lot and you're comfortable to say, okay, I'm going to take the next step forward because you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to mess up where you're at, right? We get comfortable sitting on the sidelines. The more successful we become, the more we will sit on the sidelines and justify our inaction. And so then I like to have those conversations of how long have we been sitting on the sideline? How long have you been the spot you're at right now? Because a lot of people, most successful people didn't get there by sitting on their hands. They had to roll up their sleeves and work, right? But it's not the time to just say, okay, I'm done now. I'm done. I reached a level of success. I'm done. Successful people are constantly climbing. There's no real pinnacle, right? You're just always growing. If you're not, what's the point of being here, right? And so then the conversation goes to that, is saying, okay, what's holding us back? There's three things that people always point to that hold them back. One, that outside circle is the first thing they're going to point to is outside circumstances. They're going to say, interest rates. There's an election this year. I don't like the president. I don't like the rules. I can't do this because my boss doesn't let me do this. They look for all these outside influences and outside things that they can't control. You can't give power to those things you can't control.
Yeah.
There's always going to be obstacles out there all the time, especially on the outside, whether it's, high gas prices, inflation, wars out there. And this year is going to be 100%. You will hear over and over and over, people are going to be bitching about the election that's going on because it's going to be a shit show. And it's going to be something that just it's out there. It's a distraction. Acknowledge it and move forward. And you can't do anything about it other than vote. Do your vote and forget about it after that. Right. Okay. And so outside influences are where most people start blaming and why they're sitting, right? They're going to give themselves reasons, right? We want to give ourselves a reason we want to justify our inaction. That's what we want to do internally, right? We want to justify that it's okay to sit on the sideline. The second thing is we're going to blame other people, and we're going to blame those people closest to us. It's my spouse, it's my business partner, it's my friends. Nobody thinks this is a good idea. I know somebody that did this and they lost money. I hear that all the time. I know somebody with a short-term rental, they don't make any money. Okay. I know lots of people that don't make any money. I know lots of people that do too. And so, what are you going to pay attention to? Right. So we start blaming other people for reasons why we don't want to do it, because the last thing we want to do is look in the mirror and blame ourselves. And that's the real reason, right? The middle of that is, okay, why are we not moving forward? It's our own doubts. It's our own fears. It's our own insecurities. And we don't want to blame ourselves, right? We don't want to call ourselves out and say, yeah, I'm afraid to do it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm worried that I'm gonna mess it up. And so once we realize that it is our own doubts, fears, insecurities keeping us from moving forward, a lot of times it's easier to just move forward, right? It's like just admitting you have a problem is defeats the problem a lot of times, right? And so when you look at the reasons why you sit on the sidelines, is it outside influences? Are you blaming somebody else? Or are you really looking in the mirror and saying, okay, it's me, and I need to figure out how to move past that and get that, maybe I need to get more educated. Which a lot of times you probably do, right? We need to bridge that gap of the knowledge gap that's missing, or get more comfortable with the right mentors or this, that. But once we realize that we're our only person holding ourselves back, many people get more comfortable moving forward, especially if it's the right. Because at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen unless you roll up your sleeves and move forward and work. Right? Nothing I can do is a magic pill. You can't buy a vacation rental and then all of a sudden you're going to be a millionaire. That doesn't. It's not how it works. Right? There's going to be work that we have to do, so we have to be committed to the work and we have to be ready for it. And so I usually just have that exact conversation with people to say, where are we at? Have what outcome are we chasing? Do we have the right vehicle to get us there? Do we have the right support crew to get us there? And then what else is holding us back? And it's usually one of those three things. And it's usually those outside two mostly, but the ultimate reality is it's us. We have to address our own fears, doubts, and insecurities, and we have to be okay with sucking at something in the beginning. None of us are perfect, and the first time we do anything, it's not going to be good. You and I do podcasts. Our first podcast, I still leave my first podcasts up there. And if people listen to them, they're like, why don't you take those down? I'm like, I like them up because I like to be reminded of how far I've come. Right. And being able to, and so we're just not good in the very beginning when we do things. My first properties that I put up, they were not good. They're way different than they are right now. Right. And so, but we've gotten better over time. You can only get, quality beats quantity all the time. But you can't have quality unless you have quantity first, right? You have to put in the hours before you get the quality.
Yeah, there's an expression I had my friend Eric Counts say, you have to make the pots. It comes from this old story where, there was this teacher that had two different directives that he gave his students. It was like, hey, you're going to make these pots and you have to make the perfect pot. And then he told the other half of the class, hey, you're going to make as many pots as you possibly can this semester. And the kids that made the most pots got exponentially better results than those that focus on making the perfect pot.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we get so scared and hesitant that we're like, well, it could potentially not work, so I'm not going to work. But
Exactly.
when we take that full responsibility, like you said, actually hold up that mirror to ourselves and say, am I actually being responsible here?
Yeah.
We can kick our own selves in the butt and get going.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Now, I'm curious because you said you've done almost 200 podcasts, right? About that many episodes.
Yep. Yeah.
You keep up those beginning ones. What was it that has helped you in your networking skills to be able to get those kind of dream people? Because I mean, you're one of those that I actually had on my bucket list, getting on this podcast from the first day that I did it.
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm glad I'm
absolutely.
here then. Yeah, that's awesome.
How did you do that to create value for your guests to be like, man, this is not only a good experience, this is something that they want to do and they're encouraged to.
Right. For me, my podcasts in the beginning were all solo episodes. I didn't have any guests, right? I just built a listener base, right? We became a top 1% podcast, and a lot of them were just me talking, right? I would talk about a concept. And then once that happened and I had value to offer somebody, it's like, hey, listen, we've got a lot of people who listen to our podcast now. So now it's more when we have way more people reach out to us to be on our podcast than we actually ever have on our podcast. Because ours is a very topic-based podcast, right? If they're not in the short-term rental world, then we don't have them on our podcast. I would love to have some other, there's some bigger names that I would love on my podcast. I don't talk about high performance in other areas of the world other than, even though I think it would be really valuable for my guests, and I might expand to that. So don't hold me to it. Because now we're to the point where a lot of people reach out to us, but in the beginning, no, I mean, it was just me building a customer, like a listener base, right? And where people, and we would now generate enough downloads that it kind of organically grew to where we can get the bigger names on our podcast that we want, because there's enough people who listen, right? That's what all of their booking agents, that's what they're looking for at the end of the day. It's like, how many people listen to your show, right?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to get that listener base, frankly. I mean, it was just, man. And there were times where I was just talking to Mike Pine and Kevin, shout out to those guys. They've got the Hidden Money podcast, and they're brilliant CPAs, and they understand money like the back of their hand. And they've got this podcast. It's a really good podcast, but their listener base is it's struggling. But I think they're on like episode 15 or 20, right? It's like, listen, you're brand new. You're just starting out. Just keep going. going because you've got good stuff. People will start listening, right? You have to just continue down the road. And it's like the flywheel, right? It's like really hard to push in the beginning and you got to push it really hard for a while. But then once it starts spinning, then it becomes a lot easier and it's hard to stop.
I love that. And they're bringing Russell Brunson's linchpin idea back into it, right? That flywheel where it's just
For sure.
you got to be that attractive character, and a lot of times it's not going to be pretty in the beginning. And I think sometimes we get so hesitant to be imperfect that we don't take imperfect action.
Yeah.
But imperfection is actually something that we can lean into. We don't have to be perfect. It's actually refreshing at times to have a hiccup every once in a while and to
I cannot tell you over the years how many times I've heard, I love that your stuff is not that polished, right? Because I don't edit my episodes. I mean, I literally don't go through and I edit the front and the back, right? The intro and the outro. And I mean, I stutter half the time. I don't put sentences together correctly. And I'm like, and they're like, people like that. They're like, you're just you, Shawn. You're just out there doing your thing. And, you know, they feel like they can trust you. People are so worried about messing up when they do this kind of stuff. And honestly, it makes you more relatable. You don't, you know, when you just can be you, people relate to you. They're like, I like that. You know, I like that. It doesn't seem filtered and polished in such a filtered and like an over filtered world that we live in. People appreciate just being you and being authentic and not trying to be everything to everybody. And that's where I think that if I learned one lesson along the way, because I was the same way, I thought everything had to be really, really good in the beginning. Like I would, my first episodes, as bad as they are, those are the most edited episodes I have, right? Those first 15 or 20, I would do a 20-minute episode and take 5 hours editing it. And it's horrible if you listen to it now. You're like, really? That's edited? I hate to hear the original version. And it's funny because I thought the same thing in the beginning too. And the more you're in a game, the more you're doing it, the more you're out there, you know, you just got to be you. And the best of the best, that's what they do.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now I've heard this said, niches to riches. That's the phrase that always pops in my head. When you said you don't have anyone that's outside of this asset class, outside of short-term rentals on your podcast, I think that's really, really awesome because your listeners know what to expect.
Yes.
When you're talking about business, I think this is something I learned as a missionary for my church over and over and over. If you clarify expectations, you say, here's what I'm going to do, and then you deliver on what you said you're going to do, there's no hard feelings. But if there's that miscommunication where you under deliver and you over promise, that's when there's challenges. How do you over deliver and under promise in your, not only your podcast and your business, but in short-term rentals as well?
Right. One, I think you over deliver by literally just meeting expectations. I heard Alex Hormozi talk about this before, and he was talking about this exact concept. And I believe it 100%, which is, and why I want to endorse what he was saying is, we live in a world that does not set expectations and meet expectations. Like you said on your mission, you're saying, here's what I'm going to do, and then we're going to go out and do it. You build trust when you do that, right? Immediately. Well, in any business, everything is built on trust. And so when I can meet expectations, that is the over delivery, because now I've got the trust of somebody that I can go out and help them proceed and meet their goals, whatever they're trying to do. I truly believe in our business that I'm the best person to help them out of any of the other coaches or anything out there. I love a lot of them and I know a lot of them. I'm speaking on stages, on many of their stages. Great people. I still don't believe that they have a chance of helping them because I don't think they care as much as I do. They may, but in my heart, I don't believe they do because I know how much I care. And I'm like, they can't care more than me. Right. And so the over delivery comes from just meeting expectations. We try to be very clear on who we can help, who we can't help, right? I don't do, like my company, we don't do any arbitrage, co-hosting, anything else. There's great money to be made in that. There's really smart people that do that. Right? I think you've got some arbitrage properties, right?
I started out with arbitrage. That was the model. And what attracted me to you guys was because it was a different look at it. I was like, I want to understand that. So, because that's where
the ownership side. Yeah. We only work with owners. And so we are very small niche down. None of my other competitors are that far niche down. They all do ownership, arbitrage, co-hosting. They have a mix because they want to get different layers of people that are getting into the game. We don't. We're very specific, but what we really try to do is really define and set expectations in the very beginning. I think it's critical. And I think when you do that, then not only does the consumer or your guest or your customer, they know exactly what to expect. You're setting those expectations. Then when you deliver it, exactly what you said, not over or not under. We do exactly what we say we're going to do. And then that builds a lot of trust along the way. And then that relationship can continue to progress. But that's where I think that we always are just saying, hey, listen, it starts with the very beginning of defining the expectations. And so do a good job of setting the expectations, because then you're holding yourself accountable too. It's like calling your shot. You're saying, hey, I'm going to do this. If you do that, then you hold yourself accountable on the back end. So for us, it's starting on the front end and telling them exactly what we're going to do and exactly what they can expect, so that we also are holding ourselves accountable on the back end.
I love that. And accountability is such a undervalued thing, but it's so amazing when we can not just keep ourselves accountable to what we say, but we keep our guests accountable by having clear expectations and procedures. All of this comes together with our clarity of speech.
Yeah.
It also popped into my head sometimes when we are thinking about progression. There's this expression in Chinese, 不进则退. If you're not progressing, you're digressing. And I know it's really easy to get complacent with short-term rentals. You can set them and forget them. There are times when I felt like I've done that. I don't look at my listing for a month, and then I was like, why are my bookings not working as well? You have to constantly tweak, constantly increase that clarity. Can you talk to us about the importance of recognizing those opportunities for increased clarity?
Yes. So when it comes to specifically to our world, or in general, or in the short-term rental side?
In short-term rentals and maybe in business as well.
Yeah. So one, like on short-term rentals, I always tell people, like the tendency is we want to set it, forget it, right? I've got a fairly high performing portfolio at this stage. I don't have to do a lot to my portfolio. However, one thing that I think keeps me at the top and keeps that portfolio performing at a high end is I do a lot of the heavy lifting on the front end, right? Like we said, we have very clear expectations of exactly what we're going to deliver. We make sure that property is set up correctly. We make sure that we've got the right team in place to help us deliver that. Everything is set up on the kind of the front end to do a lot of the heavy lifting. You could set it and forget it. The problem with setting it, forgetting it, is when where focus goes, action flows, right? And so I always focus on one thing at the end of every month. I look at the P&L, and I look at the calendar if we want to go use it. But I look at the P&L and I pull up the data that I want to see. I want to see how much money was spent in my market. Where am I on that scale of properties? Am I toward the top? Am I, and I know exactly where I'm at in the markets I'm in. If I'm number 1, number 5, wherever I'm at, did I slide a little bit? Did I go up a little bit? Where did I slide? Occupancy or rates? And so by just looking at the numbers at a high level and knowing the details every single month, we don't ever really see those slides. And I believe it's just because we look at it all the time. Sometimes we have to make little tweaks, which we do. And usually it's just in the articulation of what we're doing, right? It's like, okay, maybe I was, rolling into wintertime and I still have my summertime photos up and I waited a month too long to switch them out. Sometimes it's that, right? Other times, usually that's what it is for us. It's going to be how we're articulating the offer that we have, right? And most of the time for us, if we see a slide, it's because we didn't update the seasonal photos fast enough. And so, which sounds kind of weird, right? But it's a little thing and by doing it as long as we've done it, we understand those little details. That comes down to like in life, right? Mastery is being able to simplify a process, understanding it so well that you can get it dialed down so simply. And when it is in business, a lot of things seem so complicated. There's so many things going on. We're busy all day long, but we really do nothing at the end of the day, right? And so we all go through that. We all do it, and we're all like, oh man, I've got, I'm stacked up. I worked 12 hours today, but what did we really get done? Probably there's times in our lives where we don't get anything done in a 12-hour day, and we're working hard all day, right? We're busy. And it's the same concept I'm talking about on being able to get our properties performing, is understanding what you're doing and being so clear on your outcomes and expectations that you can ignore everything else and you can simplify it down to one or two. There's usually one or two things that you should be doing, focusing on, that are going to be the needle movers, right? And being able to identify the needle movers and focus and extraordinary amount of time on those and being able to say no to all the other things that feel urgent, they feel important, they keep you busy, but they're really not. And I think that I think it's hard to do that until you put the hours in, because sometimes you don't know what the needle movers are. And so there's times of your life, there's seasons in your life and in your business that you're just putting in the hours to try to figure out what those needle movers really are. And sometimes you just have to put in the hours. Like you mentioned with the pottery glass, right? Sometimes it's just doing it till you become a master. Then you can figure out how to make that pot really, really good the next time.
Exactly. And I think identifying the needle movers, that's where the skill comes in, and where mentorship actually,
Yes,
I think, helps the most.
totally.
Because that cuts time frames. If instead of saying, I'm going to focus on these 12 different things and hope that one of them moves the needle, you can talk to a mentor that's been there, done that. They see the roadblocks, they've experienced it. Like, actually, these 2 things will move the needle. Those other 9 or 10, don't even worry about them right now.
Yes. I think that that's a critical thing. And that's what I learned a while back with mentors is I hire mentors now where I'm looking for that 1% thing that they know that I don't know. Like, I have people all the time that look at our mentorship and they say, Shawn, I think I know most of what you're teaching already. And to me, they haven't learned that lesson, that because there's nothing that we teach that's new, right? It's that we understand the things that are going to move the needle, and everybody has different needle movers also, right? We teach an entire process. Well, somebody might have, steps 1 through 9 or 1 through 6 dialed in, but steps 7, 8, and 9 are not dialed in. Somebody else might know steps 1 through 3 and they understand the back end, but they don't have the middle section dialed in, right? And so it's being able to identify those needle movers. Like I say, if I can learn and get a 1 or 2% increase in what I'm doing by hiring a coach and paying a lot of money for a coach, that's exponential returns on the money that I invest in that coach. That's a different mindset than a lot of people who don't really understand mentorships and coaches. They think everything that they're going to teach them is going to be brand new. That's not the case. And I tell people that all the time. I said, you probably do know 95% of what I'm doing. You might know 100% of what I'm doing. What you haven't been able to dial in is exactly what part of that process is going to move the needle for you.
That was wisdom speaking right there. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Now, in your experience, when you're talking about property managers, because this is
Yes.
the newest part of my business. I started doing arbitrage and I wanted to get into buying the properties. That's actually why I got interested in Vodyssey, because I was like, that's where I'm going with my business. Come hell or high water, I'm going to figure out how to do that. That's why I got into your program. And then I realized I can scale my own business very quickly by managing for other people and utilizing the same skill set that I had developed as an arbitrage model. What do you look for in a full service property management company so that they're reliable, they're honest, they're loyal, and they actually deliver on what you need them to deliver on?
Yeah, love it. And one, I love when I hear of investors getting into the management space. One, I don't like to manage my properties, right? So, I'm like one of the only guys out there that's a big believer that most property owners should hire full service property managers that really understand the game, that have it dialed in. There's economies of scale with property management. And unless you have a big portfolio in the same area, it's difficult for you to get those economies of scale and do it at a high level and deliver at a high level, right? And so I love when property managers, it's the Achilles heel of the short-term rental business by far, is good property management. The old legacy, old school property management systems that are just it's a volume game. It's like, hey, we'll get as many properties in our portfolio as we can, and we'll get our fair share of business. For a property owner, that does not work. That model works for those big property management companies because they don't care that your fair share of business continues to drop because they've got 1,000 properties in their portfolio or 100 properties in their portfolio, and your slice of the pie might be getting smaller. But once your slice of the pie gets so small, they just add 10 more properties, and their slice keeps going up, right? It's for us the biggest thing. One, as an investor, in any investors that are thinking or listening to this, your most important relationship and the most important decision you will make is who you choose as a property manager. It is a critical decision. right? That relationship is a long-term relationship. The number one thing I'm looking for is somebody that is as interested in as me as maximizing that asset and understanding what their role is in maximizing the asset. And this is the other thing that I think is a disconnect. And I think that this is a disconnect for most property owners. Most property owners believe that if they buy a property, they turn it over to the property manager. It's the property manager's job to do all of these things to curate this, whoever the target audience is, curate this amazing experience, get that property set up correctly to be able to go now market it. Because if they don't have all of those things in place, if they don't have a target audience, it's not set up correctly, it's not curating a great experience, it's not, they don't have the right marketing assets and the right photo shoots, then all of a sudden you can't market it. It doesn't matter how well a property manager understands marketing and the algorithms on Airbnb and everything else. If they don't have a good product in the first place, they're not going to be able to get you better occupancy and higher nightly rates than somebody else is going to get you. You're going to get you. So as a property owner, it's our responsibility to make sure that we buy the right assets, that we set them up correctly, we curate these amazing experiences, and then we choose a property owner that cares about delivering that experience to our guest as much as we do. Right? Being able to make sure that that property looks the same way every single time. And that when that someone checks in for their anniversary or for their birthday, and they spent a lot of money to be there, that experience is delivered at such a high level that they get those callbacks and they say, hey, listen, this was amazing. This made our year. This made our, like, I will never forget this stay, right? That's what we want our property manager to be as excited about as we are, is taking this amazing property and experience and delivering it to the guests the same way every time. I want my guests to think they're my only guest every time somebody checks in. I don't want them to think, well, I'm the 50th guest, in the last couple months. And so, it's a little bit more run down and it wasn't really set up like the pictures. That's not what we want, right? I want my property manager to understand and want to be as interested in maximizing our asset as we are and understand what it takes to maximize. And Brigham, this is what I get excited about. Like when we've got a number of our members who are getting into property management like you are, and they do such a good job because you guys understand what it takes from the property ownership side. Like I just spoke at a convention with PMI, and there was about 700 property managers there. And it was amazing to me how few of them really understood this. In fact, I went in with an entirely different talk than I ended up delivering, because I started off talking at, detailed levels of what it takes, like different things that how we could deliver and maximize everything else. I had to dial it all the way back to, listen, we need to make sure that we've got what are we actually offering, right? How are we actually going to maximize? What do we need in place for us to get higher occupancy, higher rates? Because that's what the owner wants, right? And you're going to have owners call you all the time, Brigham, and they're going to say, because they're not going to be in Vodyssey, like many of them, they're going to call you up and say, hey, Brigham, I got this property. What can you do for me that somebody else can't do? And you need to say, hey, listen, where are we at? What do you got? Let me look at it, and be selective on the property, and then be able to tell them, listen, you've got a great property. I don't think it's set up correctly yet. Right now, we just have some real estate. Everybody's got nice properties. And so what can we do? You start having that conversation, they're going to be like, man, this guy knows what he's talking about. And how can we do this together? And, what am I responsible for? What are you responsible for? And you're able to take them through that, because ultimately you want to build a portfolio of properties that you can maximize, right? And that's what I want as a property owner as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the values that I'm always thinking about when I'm marketing and I'm talking to other property owners is, what makes this experience unique? What's the competitive advantage?
Yes.
What's the story that only you can tell, or the local perspective? Because a lot of times people, they don't want to buy a commodity. They could go to a hotel.
They can. Yep.
Unique experience. So could you talk to how you create unique experiences in your short-term rentals?
Yeah. One, I always tell people they need to be part of their target audience, right? And they're like, why do I need to be part of my target audience? Because then it's way easier to create these experiences because we understand them, right? I remember a while ago, as my wife just had the twins and she's in really good shape, and I thought I'm gonna start this little training program for women who have kids that are getting back in shape. and you can be the face of it, but she didn't want to do it. And so I just said, well, you just be the face of it because you just had twins and you look amazing. So and I'll write all the copy and everything else. Well, it fell flat. We didn't make any money with it. And it was because I was trying to create this great experience and training for women who just had twins. And I didn't just have twins. I'm a dad, right? That just had a wife that had twins and figured out how to get back in shape. Even though I watched the process, I thought I could talk to a specific target audience that I wasn't a part of. So I start with saying, listen, you can be part of the target audience. What do you love about that area? When you go there, do you go with your family? Do you go as couples? Do you go with friends? Are you going on work trips? Like, what are you doing when you go to that property? Like, and who are you going with? Right. And so I start there and to help them curate this experience. And they say, okay, I'm going with my family. Okay, what do you guys do there? Right? What are you going to do? And they'll tell me the different things that they're going to do. And we'll say, okay, let's pick one thing, like whether it's an outdoor activity, whether it's something at the property, whether it's something outside the property. And let's pick that and start to tell a story around it, right? We're going to tell a story about a family going out and doing this. One of our members, he's a branding expert, and he has a story. I had this conversation. He's a branding expert, and we had this conversation. I said, what do you do? Why do you like this? And he said, well, I bought the property because when my kids were growing up, I would take them to this beach and we would fly these kites. Like we went there and flew the kite, right? Seems so simple. Well, he named this property the Skydance Ranch, and his logo is this kite, this red kite flying, right? And the entire story is he's got this beautiful property overlooking the beach, this amazing beach in California. But the problem is, you would think, oh, that beach sells. The beach does sell. The problem is everybody on that entire beach line has the exact same beach in view, and they're all amazing, right? But he's telling the story of going down and flying a kite on the beach with his son. Super simple, right? But what it does is it gives the property the soul now, right? I always tell people, try to give your property a soul with a story, right? And tell that story. And it can be as simple as flying the kite on the beach. It can be, more, like my fly fishing one, right? It can be, there was one that there was in a downtown area, and the property was an old brothel. And there was this really famous madam that ran this property. And so she and hers is for girls trips. But she's like, I don't want it to be like this. I'm really nervous about telling that story because I don't want it to be like this trashy like story. And she did this like really, and it's not at all. Her girls trips are like super high class and like the furthest thing from like brothel stuff, right? And she's like, but she has this fun story around this madam and she found out the history of it and so the story can be the point is the story can revolve around the actual, if there's something historic about a property as well. But not all properties have something historic about them. Some do. Lean into that story. The point is, what can you tell the story that somebody can latch into? We remember stories. We don't remember properties, right? We remember. And so if we can tell a story and give the property a soul, then that all of a sudden brings that property to life. You just breathe life into it, and it stands out and it seems different than everything else. And it makes your marketing easier. It makes all your dialogue easier. It just is a fun part of the process.
I love that. It sometimes can be articulated in one sentence, like a kite on
Exactly.
the beach. I think that
It,
that's
it
painting the picture of possibility for your guests. Yeah, go ahead. You sound like you had
Yeah, and it can be subtle too. Like my lakeside treehouse. You're going to disconnect and unwind, and you're like literally you're here to recharge, disconnect, and unwind. That's it. Like there's not, the story is just forgetting about life for a minute, right? And we now have fiber optic. When I bought the property, we didn't have internet. I had to lean into the disconnect, right? Because I didn't have internet. It was like worse than dial up. It was horrible. Now there's fiber optic, but I've leaned into that story so much that I'm not even putting the fiber optic in, right? I'm like, and people are like, well, why don't you connect? I'm like, we kind of like this story, right? We kind of like that we've leaned into this story that you're here to just disconnect.
and I think that is crafting an experience rather than just wondering if people are going to enjoy your property.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of people get into this because they're like, I just want to make extra money. I have a guest house or I have a basement. And to really play this game at a high level, every choice is intentional.
Yes.
I have a good mentor of mine. His name is Jay Massey. He talks about, do we really understand our customer avatar and what they want, what their expectations are? If we don't understand what they expect, then when they come to the property, there's going to be a guesswork whether it's actually going to fit what they want. So
Absolutely.
if you could kind of boil down your experience into some sage advice to say this is what it takes to play at the highest level in short-term rentals, what would you say?
One is one is understanding that the money is made at the top of the market. And then understanding what levers you can actually pull. For us, the levers you pull are being able to curate a great experience. We've been talking a lot about experiences, right? Be able to come up with that experience and then be able to articulate it. And it doesn't matter how many times I tell people this, the way you articulate it, the only way you can articulate it is in photos. Really, that is our 24/7 sales rep. You can't, it doesn't matter what you put in your description, your headlines, everything else. None of that matters. You could literally have blank spots there and have a successful listing if you dial in your photos. People think it's all these other different levers. You've got to be able to articulate what you have to offer and then be able to, and that's going to raise the bar, but you have to be able to have an offer that you can do, that you can actually articulate. And that comes down to that story. It's so few people understand that we're not selling real estate. We're selling experiences. The biggest, just go look at the biggest brands out there, right? The Disneys of the world, any of your big car brands, any of your sneaker brands, any brand out there is telling a story every time they're selling you something. Right. And they've got somebody that is there telling a story. It's how did that fit into their life? Right. And how did that fit into their world? If somebody's selling a car and you watch all the commercials, it's a story of a road trip. It's a story of something, right? Disney is a story of memories. And so it's understanding what we're actually selling and being able to articulate that to operate at the highest level in this game. And I just don't think that for whatever reason, it's, the short-term rental game, there's billions of dollars being spent in it right now. There's a lot of property owners in it. And the difference between the top and the middle of the market is that gap is so wide and there's so few people at the top. It's not even like when I say it's way easier to operate at the top than it is in the middle, that is maybe the biggest understatement I could make is that like the people could understand how less crowded it is at the top than it is in the middle. By understanding those concepts, they would just be like, it's crazy. And the difference in the money is huge. The middle of the market is just, it's a race on price. Everybody just blends into the crowd. And it seems so simple to talk about, but it's so crazy how few people actually dial that in and take the time to dial it in. Because it's simple. It's not always easy, right? And so, because those are two different things, very different things.
Yeah. And to play at the top of the market, you really have to have not just one or two of your systems in place. You have to have everything in alignment.
Yes.
Your messaging in alignment, your story through your photos, making sure that your customer experience is clear. Your reviews are going to start to respond and let the market know if you are delivering consistently what you are promising.
Yes.
So let's say if you could give us some typical bad advice that you hear, what are some things that you say avoid X, Y, or Z? Because you've been in this game for, you said 20 some odd years you've been in real estate. You've heard some good advice, you've heard some bad advice.
Yeah.
What's the stuff we need to stay far away from?
Oh man. What with short-term rentals, the biggest is that the people just think that, hey, this game is so hot that you can just get in it, right? You can just buy a short-term rental, you're going to make money. And that really goes across all asset classes. You should never, ever, ever buy anything that you don't fully understand, right? Investments should be fairly simple to understand. If they're not, you probably shouldn't be getting into them. But a lot of people make it sound like that, hey, short-term rentals, this wave has been a wild ride. And there's a lot of people that rode that wave for a couple of years. There was a 2-year span that really having a short-term rental, you did make money. It was like having toilet paper during COVID. Everybody made money.
Yep.
And so everybody wanted them, right? And so it was, but that game is over now. And there's a lot of advice in our world that is still acting like that game is here. And so that's one of the worst pieces of advice. The other thing is really like people think that it's really easy to to underwrite this type of an asset class. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to short-term rentals. They're not as easy to underwrite as other asset classes. And so you're not just going to plug them into a software system and be able to spit out revenue numbers. It's really difficult to underwrite these properties because there's such a wide revenue range. And that revenue range depends so much on the things that we were talking about earlier, on being able to, and those are things that a marketing tool or a software tool, a data tool cannot measure. They cannot measure what experience you're going to deliver versus me. And so the only things they can measure are proximity and location, proximity to maybe some of the amenities, which those things can matter for sure, but that's a portion of how they're going to perform. I think that is some of the worst things that people walk into, because the reason why that's bad is, if you buy the wrong property, it's hard to adjust. If you buy the right property and you're not marketing it correctly, you didn't curate a great experience and you're struggling, we can adjust that fairly easy. You buy the wrong property, you overpay, you're in a market that can't produce the numbers that you thought you were going to be able to produce because it's just not there, right? The numbers aren't there, the revenue's not there. You're in trouble, right? You're having to sell it in best case scenario, you get your money back out of it. Worst case, you're selling it at a loss. And so I think that everybody wanting the easy button so much, and the push on the front end to say, hey, we've got the easy button for you just because that's what you want. I've got the easy button on underwriting, and I can tell you the best markets. I can tell you where you should be going. I think that's really misleading for a lot of people. And the other thing is really that there's not an end all be all asset class for everybody, period. And just because we love short-term rentals, just because I love them, you'll never hear me tell and say that they're for everybody. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there that there is a perfect asset class that's better than all of others. Whether, people are selling multifamily is way better to do, or commercial, whatever they're in, they act like is the end all be all for everybody. That's not the case across the board. You really have to decide what passive income vehicle works for you. And that comes down to understanding. And I just think that in the world we live in today, everybody wants to act like one is better than the other. And it's really not. Like, one might be better for me than it is for you, and vice versa. And so we have to really understand that. And I think that gets lost in the language out there, that because people always ask me, well, I heard that, multifamily is better, or why would you not do multifamily, or why should I do short-term rentals versus multifamily? I'm like, listen, they all have pros and cons. And based on your resources, based on your knowledge, based on what you're trying to do with your portfolio, that will help us determine which one is actually better or not.
Right. I think that was fantastic. Great recognizing what some of those little details of bad advice are, and then how we can take our business and really become a professional in all aspects of it. And this isn't for everyone. That's the thing that I think is refreshing, is just because it's for me and it's for Shawn doesn't necessarily mean it's for you. And I feel like if you could let us know maybe one or two ideas that would help us cut time frames with getting our first short-term rental, what would you tell someone that maybe they have the money and they want to do it, they've maybe done some research online? What are the things that you're like, I need to have this in place to make sure that I'm protecting myself?
Yeah. The one is the right team, right? If you want to accelerate your progress and process into anything new, especially, you've got to have the right team. Right. And so whether that's mentors, for sure, you're going to have property managers on your team. You're going to have realtors. You're going to have finance partners. That team is critical if you want to really accelerate into anything. And if you don't, I'm just a huge believer that if you have never done it, you're going to accelerate your progress by getting somebody that has done it before and that is doing what you're trying to do. There's so many people out there that, Alex Hormozy, I listen to him all the time. I love him, but he said, advice to 20-year-olds, why don't you go do something before you teach something? Right. And he had a few swear words in there, so I cleaned it up for you, Brigham. But it was because it's like everybody wants to teach something that they're not even doing, right? And so, that goes back to the other one. The worst advice you could ever listen to out there is from somebody giving you advice on something that they have no idea or they're not doing, right? If I want to make, if I'm trying to make $1 million a year or $200,000 a year, if somebody is telling me how to make $1 million a year that's never made $1 million a year consistently, probably not the best advice, right? But if I want to make $1 million a year and I'm talking to somebody that does that and has been doing it, I'm going to accelerate my progress to $1 million a year way faster than trying to figure it out on my own. Right? It just is what it is, right? Success leaves clues, and they're going to know how to navigate the roadblocks and the bumps that you're going to face that you haven't faced yet. And so you're going to get through them faster. You're still going to face them. You're still going to come up with them, but you're going to get through them faster by having somebody. So anytime that somebody is asking me about accelerating their progress is saying, listen, go find the person who's doing what you want to do and figure out what it takes to get that mentorship and somebody in front of you that you can do that. Because just learning, and even if you're in the game, there's a lot of people who are in the game, in the short-term rental game right now. They come to us and they say, hey, listen, I was making really good money. I've got a lot, I've got 5 or 6 properties. I was doing really well and I'm struggling now, right? They don't know how to go through this shift, right? So even though you're in the game, you're not an expert in being able to get through a shift. So has somebody gone through a shift? Can you find somebody that is succeeding in today's market, right? Didn't succeed 3 years ago, and they have succeeded in ups and downs. Like there's just clues that you can find. And I think we're so quick to try to jump into it on our own because there's information overload online, right? And there's a lot of really, really good information online. Like really good. The problem with it is when you have lack of experience and is you don't know how to filter through the good and the bad. And so having a mentor really helps you filter through that, right? There's a lot of times where there's multiple, let's be honest too, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And how many times do, like in our group, right? They're like, well, I heard somebody say this. It's like, you can do that, but that's counterproductive to what we're doing right here. So even though I might say this and Bill says something over here, they both could be really good pieces of advice depending on the road you're on. But if you're on my road and you follow Bill's advice, it's going to derail you and you're going to lose track of where we're at on this road, right? And so it's one of those things too of being able to, when you have a mentor, they can just help guide you down the road that they're familiar with, right? That's what they're going to do. A good mentor or coach is going to keep you on the road they're familiar with, not teach you the stuff that they haven't done. A lot of people ask me how to do self-management. I will never teach anything that I don't do. I know how to manage properties. I've been doing this long enough that I can pull up a management software. I could figure out how to manage a property, but I'm never going to teach something I don't do. And so if that's what road somebody wants to run down, I'll say, listen, you got to run down somebody else's road because that's not what I do.
Yeah, I think that's also wisdom right there. Just recognizing what you're an expert in and what you're not.
Yeah.
And finding those people that are down the road farther, they've gone through the bumps, they've gone through the twists and turns, and they can help you know what you need to pack, what you need to bring, all the different elements that will help you on your journey.
Yeah.
So I know we're about out of time, so I wanted to make sure that I give you a moment. How do people connect with you? How do you continue this conversation? You're always welcome to reach out to me, and I can connect you to those resources. But where do they find you online? What are some of the events you're doing? Some of the things that people can stay in contact with you, Shawn?
Yeah, the best one is just Vodyssey.com, VODYSSEY.com. We've got our book on there. You can go get a free download copy of that. What the hell is a lifestyle asset? It takes you through the process of what, at least our view of this world and how we progress through that, buying the right asset, setting it up to deliver a great experience, and then ultimately marketing it. And that's what that book takes you through. And then ultimately we always have trainings on there. You can link to my podcast and our YouTube channel. And then, there's ways to reach out to our team if this is a road you're like, hey, I want to see if this is right for me. We always would love to chat with somebody on an interview on that and see if this is the right road. But we try to post a lot of content on there. We're trying to get even better at that. And I'm a big believer in posting and putting out free stuff and just making sure there's no secrets behind closed doors of what we're doing by any stretch. And so Vodyssey.com is by far the best place to go with a lot of resources.
I love it. And I'm a member. So guys, I'm not sharing things that I don't do. I've gone through the courses. I love what he teaches, and he has a great way of articulating simply high level concepts and those things that move the needle. So I do really appreciate about the content that you put out and the way that you articulate it too. Because I appreciate
that. That means a lot. I appreciate that, Brigham, because I never look at myself as a coach and never thought I would be doing this. I love it more than anything, and that is the one thing that I always try to do is just to get better at articulating. You know, the better you can articulate complicated concepts and make them simple, the better results that people get over time. And so I appreciate you saying that.
And I know that for me, because I came from a background as a teacher. I taught Mandarin Chinese and
Yeah,
theater for 7 years. Loved it. And seeing a master teacher who is a practitioner of what they teach, it is very different than hearing someone that has no idea of what they're actually teaching and just saying one or two sentences ahead of the kids.
yeah,
You definitely are a master at what you do, and it shows in the content that you share. It shows in the things that you bring up and the warnings to say, hey, that's bad advice. Don't do that. Do this. This is working. It's so helpful. And one of my favorite things you do in our group is you do this on Tuesdays. Ask me anything call. I think
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great value. I want to be on that more.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing. In fact, it's funny. I do webinars every once in a while, and you'll find that like I do just workshop trainings, and I usually I'll do like a training for 40 minutes, and then I just open it up to Q&A. That's where I'm most comfortable, is just opening up the mics and letting people ask, and that's what I love. And we'll do 3 or 4 hour live Q&As once a month for just, people outside of our community. And yeah, that's kind of my comfort zone, is just opening up the mics and let's talk about it.
And I think you keep it real, and that's something I really appreciate about you. And thank you so much for coming onto this podcast and adding so
Yeah.
much value. Is there anything else that you were thinking in the back of your head that you wanted to share that you weren't able to yet, or a question that I
No,
didn't ask that I wish I would?
no, it was awesome. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you having me too, Brigham. And those of you listening, we know how valuable your time is. And it does mean a lot that we have people listening and spending it with us. And so, what I always say, and I always just would challenge everybody every single day, is to pick that one thing you can do to build that life you don't want to take a vacation from. I think that there is real wisdom in just saying, what can I do today? Just that one little thing that can help me continue to progress. What did you say? Is it a Chinese saying or a Japanese saying that
That's why, if you're not progressing, you're digressing.
and I live my life by that, right? If you're not growing, you're dying, right? And it's just, and that's what helps me keep moving that needle forward. It doesn't mean I need to run a marathon every day. I just need to do that one thing. And so at the end of the day, that's what I always tell people. I just challenge them to say, what can I do today to start building that life I don't want to take a vacation from?
And we're going to sign off with that. Thank you so much, Shawn. God bless. Really appreciate your time, energy, and effort to share with us your experience. And once again, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brigham. Appreciate you having me.